When Melville and I visit our nephews in Denver, we often take them to the zoo. Grayson is 8, Reed is 5, and we've gone to the zoo with them a few times now. The day goes like this. The boys run from one exhibit to the next. They shout, "Lion!" They race to the next animal, shout, "Giraffe!" and race off to the next thing. Melville and I chase after them, shouting, "Slow down! Watch out for that stroller! Wait for us at the bears, please!" And most frequent of all, "Grayson, Reed, you are not listening." After one trip to the zoo, when the boys were about 3 and 5, I realized that all day I had been saying listen when I really meant obey. And I wondered, where did that come from? The answer was common English usage. Adults say that to children all the time. Managers say it to employees. Men sometimes say it to women. We ask someone to listen when what we want is for them to obey. That's not surprising. The Bible does the same. The Hebrew idiom for listen means obey. Abraham listens to Sarah, then he does what she tells him to. God gives commandments, but the Israelites don't listen. They have heard God's words perfectly well, they just don't do what God says. In the gospel, if you confront another member of the church and they listen, if they obey, you have regained them. This usage is a shame, because genuine listening has nothing to do with inciting obedience. When we listen, we seek to understand another person. We set aside our own viewpoint, what we want to say next, and we create space in the conversation for the other person. We hear them. We genuinely hear them, whether we agree with them or not. Perhaps there's been a time in your life when someone listened to you that way. When it's happened for me, I have felt seen and known and loved, like I really matter. Real listening is an act of love for our neighbor. Listening to understand is essential to reconciliation, which itself is essential to Christian community. This is something the gospel writer Matthew knows about. Audrey Rust points out that Jesus' instructions for conflict resolution are not a template for every situation. Jesus assumes that the sin is clear-cut, it's indefensible, it happened in public, and everyone agrees it was wrong. Real life in community is a lot messier and more ambiguous than that. And it can be dangerous to confront someone alone, especially when the sin is abuse or bullying. So maybe we focus less on the specifics of the process Jesus lays out and more on the big picture. Jesus expects his followers to practice reconciliation. One purpose of Jesus' life and ministry is to reconcile all people to God. Whatever chasm exists between humanity and God, Jesus has come to close it, to restore us to unity with God. This has always been God's desire for us, as the prophet Ezekiel points out. Wickedness and sin separate us from God. God pleads with the wicked to turn back to God and live. A community that follows Jesus participates in his work of reconciliation. Our mission at St. John's is to restore all people to unity with God and each other in Christ. In other words, our ministry as a Christian community is reconciliation. Reconciliation means listening. Listening to understand. Listening as love of neighbor. Listening to learn who has been hurt, and how, and by whom, and why the hurt happened, and how amends need to be made, not only between individuals, but also how a community's practices and systems might need to change. Listening takes the brokenness of human nature seriously. The Apostle Paul wrote that when he tried to do good, inevitably he did evil. He said, "I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate." He thought he was incapable of doing any good at all, except through the grace of God in Jesus Christ. I think Paul is being a little melodramatic, but he's on to something about human beings. We hurt each other, sometimes out of malice, more often through carelessness or thoughtlessness. When we listen to understand, we acknowledge that we aren't perfect. We give each other permission to make mistakes. We give each other permission to be hurt, not to feel like we have to deny or hide our pain. And as we understand each other, Jesus comes to be in our midst. It is in the act of reconciliation that he is there among us. This is how we love one another. In listening, to understand. In understanding, to make amends. In making amends, to reconcile. In reconciliation, to be in the presence of Jesus. Listening is holy because it leads us to Jesus Christ. Listening is holy work, and it is countercultural. We human beings tend to seek out people who are like us and avoid those who are not like us. This affinity for our tribes has led us to sort ourselves into increasingly homogeneous communities. We now live in a deeply polarized society, where we are expected, even encouraged, to be friends with and marry and live next door to and buy from people just like us, and only people just like us. Many Americans have a hard time even having a conversation with someone of differing political views, or a different race, or a different religion. I have to force myself to talk to a couple of my aunts at family gatherings. There's just so little we agree on. And look where our inability to listen to each other has gotten us. Police brutality against Black Americans has been a problem for generations, since the beginning of modern policing. Black Americans have said so for years. They've told the stories of murdered sons and daughters and brothers and partners. Most white Americans didn't listen. Not until cell phone videos of police shootings made white America notice. I should not have been shocked by the depth of pain and outrage over the murder of George Floyd, but I was, because I wasn't listening. And my failure to listen has compounded the suffering of my siblings of color and made it that much harder to address the sin of systematic racism. But when we do listen, transformation becomes possible. A pianist named Daryl Davis was playing in an all-white bar when an audience member approached him and said, "I've never heard a Black pianist play like Jerry Lee Lewis before." And Davis, who is Black, replied, "Who do you think taught Jerry Lee Lewis to play that way?" The two of them got to talking over a couple of drinks, and the man said he had never had a drink with a Black person before. Davis asked why, and the man said, "I'm a member of the Ku Klux Klan." Davis thought he was joking, but he wasn't. This guy was an actual card-carrying Klansman. But at the end of the night, he gave Davis his phone number and asked him to call the next time he played a gig there, so this man could come and listen. Davis and this Klansman became friends. Davis listened to him, challenged the racist views, made it clear that he disagreed, and genuinely listened to him. This man eventually left the Klan and renounced white supremacy. So did 25 other Klansmen that Davis has befriended over the years, including the Imperial Wizard, the national leader of the KKK. Davis says, "The most important thing I learned is that when you are actively learning about someone else, you are passively teaching them about yourself. So if you have an adversary with an opposing point of view, give that person a platform. Allow them to air that point of view, regardless of how extreme it may be. And believe me, I've heard things so extreme at these rallies, they'll cut you to the bone. Give them a platform. You challenge them. But you don't challenge them rudely or violently. You do it politely and intelligently. And when you do things that way, chances are they will reciprocate and give you a platform. So he and I would sit down and listen to one another over a period of time. And the cement that held his ideas together began to get cracks in it. And then it began to crumble. And then it fell apart. There is only one Daryl Davis. We can't all emulate him, and we probably shouldn't. His approach to racism is controversial. I personally am really uneasy with it, and I don't think I could do it. Davis himself says that it is not the job of Black people to talk racists out of their beliefs. That's important to remember. So maybe we focus less on the specifics of Daryl Davis's work and more on the big picture, which is that listening to understand can change people. Refusing to engage with them or take their views seriously does not change them. Davis observes, when all you do is sit around and preach to the choir, it does absolutely no good. It's listening across lines of difference, listening across lines of conflict, that creates space for Jesus to do the work of reconciliation. We may be unwilling to befriend a Klansman, but we can listen to someone with different political views or of a different race or religion. We can listen to people we have hurt through our carelessness or thoughtlessness. Sometimes, when the circumstances are right, we can listen to people who have hurt us. As we listen, we understand. As we understand, we make amends. As we make amends, we reconcile. And as we do that, Jesus Christ himself is among us.